Ever since the new patch came out, the people have been asking me, DukeSloth, what about Kuzenbo? Is he still a meme? And that I will answer today. First of all, Kuzenbo got an amazing new skin. The skin is called Kuzenbo. That is actually very unrelated to his balance, but I like to talk about it because he has such an angry voice pack, and when he talks that way it reminds me a little bit of my mother speaking in German to me. Now what has actually happened to Kuzenbo this patch? He got various buffs, which I will read about now. Kuzenbo is receiving feel-good updates. If you remember that song from Gorillaz, it's called Feel Good Inc., so it's maybe like that. And bonus utility effects that should help his performance. Nene Kappa now slows targets who are hit by the initial throw, rewarding Kuzenbo players for their accuracy. Sumo Slam is seeing a cooldown reduction along with a more responsive turn. Finally, Watery will no longer knock targets so far outward. These changes cause the guard to provide his team with more controlled disruption. Now this may all sound a little bit confusing at first, because it's very complicated and there are some very big words in that. Because of that, we will talk about all of that in detail. Now let's begin with the Nene. Nene is actually German. If you say Nene in German, it means no. For example, if your friends ask you, do you want to go out tonight? You will always say, Nene, I would rather stay in and play video games. For some reason, Kuzenbo's little friends are also called Nene. I'm not sure why, but I'll accept it. What they can do now that they couldn't do before is slow you. Maybe it makes a little bit sense with the new slow. Maybe they say, Nene, you can't go here, so I slow you down. So that helps him a little bit, because it gives him some soft crowd control. Kuzenbo's second ability, Shell Spikes, wasn't actually changed, but I like to talk about it a little bit so my German friends don't get confused. Many Germans only know Shell as the Tankstelle, the gas station. But this is not the Shell we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the Shell by the sea. This makes sense because Kuzenbo is a turtle and he lives by the sea. There's a little tongue twister about the Shell that I would like to read out here. She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells are shells, surely seashells, so she shells shore on the seashore. I'm shells, shore, shells. Sorry, I need to practice that a little more. I'm not that good yet, but I will come back to you soon with more seashells. So seashells. His third ability, Sumo Slam, also got a buff. Now yes, Sumo Slam is like when the sumo ringers fight. They're called sumo wrestlers in English. And the ability functions like that too. What you can do now that you couldn't do before is sharper turns. I know a lot of my German friends enjoy watching Fast and Furious, and it's kinda like that. You can really Tokyo drift now. Also, you will be able to do that a little more often because the cooldown is relatively low. Therefore, it's actually worth to put points into the ability. And by worse, I don't mean the one that means that it's bad, but the one that it means that it's beneficial. I just have a really hard time pronouncing verse. The ultimate Watery was also changed. As you know, this is the ability you should only use in the most grave situations. Sorry, I had to make that pun. Instead of knocking the enemies away, the ability will now make them more knocked up. Now for my fellow Germans, if you Google knocked up in the Urban Dictionary, you may find results that don't really explain what I'm talking about here. And it may confuse you a little bit. In fact, they just get knocked into the air and not pregnant. If you happen to have played Kuzenbo before, then you may not be used to how the enemies fly away now. It's quite a different feeling and I would recommend getting used to it a little bit. Maybe in a jungle practice. So does all this make Kuzenbo more viable? I would say yes, quite a lot. He now has a lot more means of setting himself and his allies up. When he can slow enemies before he attacks them and also gets the block from the Kappa still, it will be very helpful in many situations. That also means that he can hit his 3 a lot better, which will make him do more overall in teamfights or in solo engagements. The sharper turning is really noticeable. You can really drift around the map now and be a lot bigger of a threat for enemies that get too close to you when beforehand they could simply sidestep you. Being able to use this ability a lot more often in later stages of the game also means that you're not sitting around like a turtle when your 3 ever goes on cooldown. I would in almost all situations maximize the 3 over the 2 now, as it is very helpful to have that additional damage and the additional crowd control against the enemy laner. If your enemy is very effective at blocking the Nene Kappa, you can actually even consider maximizing the Sumo Slam before the Nene Kappa. That means that they will no longer be able to stand in front of their minions to block the Nene Kappa, because if they do, it will mean that you can push them through their own wave and make them take damage from their own minions while clearing most of the wave with your Sumo Slam and then still having the Nene Kappa to clear. This is especially helpful since, as the Sumo Slam gets lower cooldown over time, you will be able to use it more frequently than the Nene Kappa, whereas with the Nene Kappa you rely on your shell spikes to lower the cooldown. It's a lot easier to utilize Sumo Slam that way, so I think maximizing that ability will become a lot more of a flexible option. Watery Grave, which allows you to fidget spin it around a little bit, will also be more useful for your team. Before, you would just push enemies away and that was pretty much it. Now they kinda stay around the same place, which means that it's harder to push them into towers, but it also means that your teammates can actually hit them with abilities, which means that it's actually a lot better for your team. It still has decent enough disruption, even though it's quite easy for enemies to use abilities in between, maybe to get out or use Aegis. I will say that despite all this, I strongly believe that Kuzenbo is a much better solo laner than support. He is a lot more focused on single target crowd control with his slow and his 3, so most of his utility focuses on taking out a single target. That is not so good for support unless your name is Capri, because then you can revive people. The only strong crowd control in his kit is in his ultimate, and even that is a bit situational. So overall I would say he is a bit similar to Sobek, who also is usually a bit better in solo. But different from Sobek, who we also see in support, Kuzenbo benefits a lot from taking damage with his 2, so therefore you want to build as tanky as possible. And that is more possible in solo lane, where you often get more ahead and you can build more selfish with more tankiness and more health. And talking about tankiness and health, there are a few new kits on the block. Vampiric Shroud is finally back, and it's an excellent solo lane item when you're against a physical damage dealer. It has physical protection now, 10 of that, and it no longer has magical lifesteal, but instead when you hit an enemy with an ability, you restore 6 health and 3 mana. That means when you hit a full wave, you get 36 health and 18 mana per ability. But you can use 2 abilities on the wave, as I told you, so that's very helpful when you need it. Therefore I would say this item is core as long as you're against a physical solo laner. Another item that I would say is pretty much core on Kuzenbo now is Voidstone. It's not necessarily against the solo laner, but it has 150 health now. Kuzenbo can deal quite a lot more damage than many other guardians, and having some protection reduction really amplifies that. Voidstone is perfect for that. It still has some power as well and some magical defense, but the health really makes it stand out. Similarly, if you find yourself against a comp with sufficient magical damage, you can also consider getting Genji's Guard now, which is also very strong on him, because I think Kuzenbo greatly benefits from cooldown reduction. And once again, this item is a lot more tanky now, even though sometimes your team will require you to build Shogun's Kusari. Now, as you know, I don't like giving full builds for solo laners, because I think you always have to consider countering and stuff like that, but I will give you some items that I think are important. First of all, different from other guards, I think it's justifiable to go into cooldown reduction boots. Kuzenbo does benefit a lot from that, because as long as he doesn't have his cooldowns up, he really cannot do that much. You don't have to do that, you can go into penetration boots as well, or even green force reefs if you want to be more tanky, but I really like them. Also, I think it's very important to keep in mind that teleport got nerfed. I like going Swift Wing instead, especially on Kuzenbo, because it makes him even more tanky and he will die even less. That is basically how the laning phase plays out for Kuzenbo most of the time anyways. You will simply not die early on and then later on become more impactful with your team, unless the enemy makes stupid mistakes and gets too close to your towers. While I still believe that Mark of the Vanguard is a very strong item, I feel like in many situations you will not even need it anymore, as long as you have Vampiric Shroud and Swift Wing. Other items that are certainly effective is anything that offers cooldown, so if you're going for a breastplate of Valor early, it will allow you to use your abilities more often. However, you can also consider going for Mystical Mail, especially because it synergizes so well with Voidstone, meaning you will just deal more ticking damage over time. Another option is obviously Hide of the Enemy and Lion, as it does reflect more damage, especially in combination with your 2. Items that cause more damage reduction or disruption like Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord are also never out of place, as they will allow you to tank up more damage and get out more safely while controlling the enemies more. I would prefer Spirit Robe over Mantle of Discord most of the time, because with Kuzenbo you typically want the enemies to attack you and deal damage to you so you can reflect more. In the same sense, Spectral Armor is probably usually not the best choice. As for Relics, I know a lot of you like to build Swords. I think Swords is a very good item on Kuzenbo, and when you can afford to build it, it is very nice because it gives you even more reflect. I will say, however, that I don't think it's great in every situation. Sometimes you just need other items to help your team more, for example a horrific emblem, or sometimes you will need a teleport later on to prevent split push and to get back to team fights better in quicker ways. So therefore, I would say while Swords is nice, only look into building it when you can afford it, which still is quite often. That concludes my guide to Kuzenbo and will give you an overview of how he plays in the new patch. I hope you enjoyed this and it was informative. Please try it out in your games, defeat the enemies until only the turtle race survives. Oh sorry, I went a little bit off script there, I was not supposed to say that, I apologize. Thank you very much for watching, I hope to see you for the next one tomorrow. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click that subscribe button and maybe the bell next to it, it rings a lot, which is very nice and it helps me out. DukeSloth, out.